All right, I think we are live. I can see participants joining. We will give everyone another minute or so to log in, and then we'll kick off. Hello, everyone, to those continuing to log in. Thank you for the comments in the chat. I think I can still see Morten D's logging in. So if you bear with us for just a few more seconds before we start with today's event. All right, I think the numbers are slowly slowing down. So let's begin. And of course, anyone who is still logging in or joining, we are very much looking forward to having you on board. So good afternoon, everyone. And thank you very much for joining our webinar today. My name is Antonia Bird. I'm the co-chair for the MENA committee of the Greener Arbitrations campaign. And today we will be talking about the very important topic of going paperless in arbitration. If I can just pause there for a moment, when I mentioned this topic to some of my friends and colleagues outside of the legal industry, I received various surprised reactions. My friends in tech, for example, said, why would you need to be discussing on a webinar going paperless when, of course, so many industries don't print paper for many, many years, including prior to the pandemic. I do wonder whether anyone on this webinar agrees with that surprise. I assume not. In fact, in my discussions with lawyers, the surprise is usually quite the opposite. I typically get asked by colleagues in the legal industry, how is it even possible to go paperless in the first place? Understandably, we do work with more paper than some of the other industries, but that's I think encapsulates the difference between our industry and some of the other industries that may already have long ago gone paperless or near paperless. I personally have moved to the nearly close to paperless side of things around the beginning of the pandemic, and have never looked back. Yes, as I've explained to many colleagues before, the first hearing without paper was certainly a shock to the system, but my life is now very happily bundle free. So today's webinar will be split into two panels. The first panel will consider the benefits of going paperless. And what we want to focus on is not just the environmental factors and the environmental benefits and cost benefits, but also everyday benefits to our lives as arbitration practitioners. And the second panel is a very hands-on training session, specifically giving practical tips by experts in the field of how technology can be used to our advantage at the various stages of arbitration proceedings. Our hope is that today's session will demonstrate that going paperless is not just good for the environment and reduction of costs and so on, but also it does make our lives actually more efficient and better in many ways. So with that, thank you, first of all, very much to the co-organizers of the event, Ali Armari Al Hage law firm and Kata and Al Tamimi law firm in the GCC. Thank you very, very much for the work that has gone into making this happen. And let me briefly introduce the moderator for panel one, and then we will immediately move to panel one. So thank you very much to Miriam Eid, the moderator, who's also the steering committee member for the MENA arbitration campaign here in MENA. She is senior counsel with Al Mari Al Haq Law Office in Doha. and leads the firm's arbitration and ADR practice. Miriam's practice focuses on complex commercial and construction arbitrations. She's qualified and registered with the Beirut Bar Association and has more than 14 years experience in the field. She's also a lecturer, author, and a very vital member of several organizations in the arbitration community in the region. So with that, I will pass over to Miriam for the first panel. Thank you very much, Miriam.
Thank you very much, Antonia. Good afternoon, everyone. For a long time, arbitration and more generally the justice system were heavily reliant on paper. From the beginning, commencement, especially of arbitration, until the rendering of the arbitration award. Notifications wouldn't be considered valid unless physically served through hard copies to each of the parties. Same goes to the final award, which should be printed in a number of copies that is equal to the parties and the members of the arbitral tribunal, then packed, bound, packed, and shipped across the world in order to be considered as having validly served the parties. Despite the progress in technology, and not long ago, arbitral tribunals still refused and dismissed parties' requests for e-submissions and virtual viewings on the basis or the pretext that they would compromise or infringe upon due process rights and equal treatment. It's as if justice could not be served unless it's served on paper. It needed the legal community, a whole pandemic, a worldwide pandemic, to realize that justice does not need paper and that arbitration especially could go fully paperless while ensuring due process and the parties' rights to be heard. Several studies have shown that a single arbitration would need more than 20,000 trees in order to mitigate the carbon emission produced by this arbitration. And it also showed that one hearing would have carbon footprint as much as a small cruise ship. This is how much paper in arbitration proceedings could have an impact on the environment. So to understand the real impact and effects of the use of paper in arbitration on the environment, but also whether there are any drawbacks to going paperless, whether on the environmental side or on the legal side, this session has invited prominent arbitration practitioners and scientists to share their experience on why arbitration should go paperless. It is my pleasure to introduce first Claudia Al-Haj. She's the managing partner of Rashid Al-Nawi Law Office in Qatar in association with Claudia Al-Haj Law Office in Lebanon, known as Al-Nawi and Al-Haj Law Offices. Claudia is a seasoned lawyer with extensive experience as litigator and arbitrator. She has successfully led complex commercial and construction arbitrations from cradle to grave under various arbitration rules, including the ICC, the LCIA, and KICA. Claudia was recognized as global leader in international arbitration in Qatar, Band 1, for the 22 edition of Chambers and Partners, and the global leader in construction in Qatar by Huzhu Legal. She's described by various legal sources, as well as her clients, as a leading litigator in her field that defends her cases with decisiveness and charm. Please welcome with me, Claudia. Our second panelist is Khushbu Shahdatpouri. Khushbu is a senior disputes lawyer at Tamimi & Company. She is a dual qualified lawyer admitted to practice in Singapore and New York. Her practice focuses on international dispute resolutions, including commercial, construction, energy, and oil and gas projects. She has represented clients before the Singapore High Court, the Court of Appeals, the DISC, and QFC courts. Khushbu has also worked at the United Nations International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia and is part of various international arbitration organizations, one of which being the MENA subcommittee of the Greener Arbitration Campaign. Please also welcome Khushbu. Finally, our last panelist is Bethany May Reniers. Bethany has a purely scientific background. She's not a lawyer. She's a scientific researcher specializing in environmental policy and sustainability. She holds a master's degree in environmental technology with environmental resource management from the Imperial College London, England. She is currently pursuing her PhD in environmental policy, also at Imperial College London, where her research includes systems thinking and nature-based solutions. Bethany has extensive experience as a sustainability analyst for the sustainable markets and often lectures on environmental, social governance, and science communication. Before we start the session, there is a poll question for the audience that I'd like you all to answer to see where we stand before this session on going paperless. And the question is, should arbitration go paperless? Yes, no, or doesn't matter. Please take time to answer the question. Thank you. Wow, 86% said yes. So our audience is already convinced that arbitration should go paperless. We have 10% of no. I hope we will be able to convince you why arbitration should go paperless, and 4% think it doesn't matter. On this note, let's start with our first question to lay down the scientific ground on why arbitration should go paperless. Bethany. So Bethany, could you please let us know and let the audience know what are the effects of the use of paper on the environment?
Absolutely. So thanks for that introduction, Miriam. It's great to be here and chatting to you all. So why should we go paperless? What's the point? So overwhelmingly, I'm quite impressed to see that 86% say that we should. But I guess it doesn't matter whether you think we should or shouldn't. It's arming you with the information so you can all make an informed decision. So before we talk about the impacts of the environment, I think it's important that we first understand what's going on in the environment. So you may hear words like greenhouse gas emissions, climate change, global warming, all being thrown around. But what do those actually mean? So climate change is the idea that the world is changing. So we know the Earth goes through natural warming and cooling cycles. We've had ice ages, we've had heat waves before. But what we talk about when we talk about climate change is the fact that that's been changing at a rate that's never been seen in the history of the Earth before. So scientists from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, this is a group of scientists that from all over the world and from many different universities all work together with the UN to research and provide neutral information that is just scientific and not political. And they've said that human activities, just human activities, have caused a 1 degree increase since pre-industrial levels of temperature. So before the Industrial Revolution, the Earth was going through normal cycles, but since then, since we've started burning fossil fuels, we've caused a 1 degree increase. And scientists think it's highly likely, and for a scientist to say highly likely, they're pretty sure that it will cause 1.5 degrees by 2032. Now, the UN and the IPCC have called this the decade of action. So if we're going to do something about climate change, it's now. It's literally now or never. So when we talk about climate change, we often talk about greenhouse gas emissions. So what are greenhouse gases? So the Earth has an atmosphere, and we have this atmosphere that keeps the Earth at the right temperature so that we can survive. Other planets that don't have atmospheres, it's part of the reason why we can't move to Mars. It doesn't have an atmosphere, so it doesn't trap oxygen, it doesn't trap the right amount of heat. So the joke is, it's like Goldilocks. Earth is just right for us to survive and thrive. However, since the Industrial Revolution, we have put more gases there than would occur naturally. And we call these greenhouse gases. So carbon dioxide is a major one that most people have heard of. Carbon dioxide stays in the atmosphere for between 300 to 1,000 years. So it's fine if it's the normal amounts that we're meant to have. We breathe it out, plants respire it. So it's a normal thing we have, but we've added more by burning fossil fuels. So we've increased these levels. We also have methane. So you might have heard of this. It's famous because it's what cows burp and fart. And the joke is that cow farts are contributing to climate change. But whilst it may sound a bit funny, it actually is quite a big issue. If we were to put beef and dairy production as a country, they account for the third highest amount of greenhouse gases after China and America. So cow farts and burps are actually quite a serious issue. And this is why we talk about reducing your beef consumption, going more vegetarian just a few days a week, or not drinking dairy. We also have nitrous oxide. So this is NOx gases, which you may have heard of, and these come out of your cars. And NOx gases, 1 ton of NOx is the equivalent to 298 tons of CO2. So actually, when we talk about NOx, that's much more significant. And it takes more than a century for NOx to dissolve and to disappear in the atmosphere. So greenhouse gases are a really complicated system. And when we're adding to them by cow farts, by cars, by burning fossil fuels, we're changing the system and we're having a negative impact on that, which we're adjusting it. We talk about greenhouse gases because it's like a greenhouse, it makes things warmer, and we need it to be warm enough to survive, but we're now pushing it above the level. So that's where our 1 degree of warming comes from. In the UK, we've got a bit of a heat wave. We wouldn't be British, you weren't complaining about the weather. So it's raining, it's too cold. If it's hot, it's too hot. So we've got 30 degrees in the UK this week. So I'm sitting here with my fan on. But we've got fans, right? But we still have high levels of heat stroke. And that's in a country where we have resources like fans. There are parts of the world that are going over 50 degrees regularly now, which used to be quite unheard of. It was a rare event. Now it's more common than ever. And this is the problem, is that extreme events are only going to get worse. And this is what climate change is about. It's not about, oh, it's just going to get hotter. We're going to have hotter days, but we're also going to have changes in water patterns and rainfall. That's going to affect farming and drought. Climate change doesn't respect boundaries or borders or companies or countries. It doesn't respect gender, race, religion. It goes everywhere and it affects everybody differently. And this is something that we really need to think about when we think of the global responsibility we have for climate change. Now, linking this back then, so what is the effect of paper in this big grand scale that we're talking about? Well, 1 kilo of paper emits 1.2 kilos of CO2. And that's before we take into account that we move paper around, we ship it places, we transport it between things. You print off one piece of paper, but you realize there's a typo or a mistake, or there's different drafts of things, so printing more and more. We're chopping down trees, which is a source of biodiversity. Trees are our friends. They literally breathe in the carbon dioxide we emit and store it. But when we chop that tree down and turn it into paper, we're then releasing that carbon dioxide that it has stored. We're also taking away the homes for the animals that live there. And we then cover it in ink and chemicals and toners, and bleaches, which then also affect the system. These often are made in countries where there's less regulation, so there's often leaking into the environment. So it's starting to build up into a not so pretty picture anymore. It takes 10 litres of water to make 1 sheet of A4 paper. So that's an extortionate amount of water. Water scarcity is already an issue with climate change. It's only getting worse. The UN predicts that 50% of developing countries will experience water scarcity by 2050, and 18% of developed countries. So this isn't a problem that's in another country. This is a country that an issue that's going to affect everybody. So it's really important that we start to think about our actions. So using paper, do we really need to print something? Do we really need to use it? So we need to think about what we're doing and how we can start making these changes, and going paperless, things like arbitrations, is a really good start in that direction.
Thanks a lot, Bethany, for the valuable information. Now, having heard the negative effects, and there are so many, on using paper in international arbitration, let's hear if there are, and here I turn to Claudia, if there are any practical benefits for lawyers or for all the arbitration stakeholders of going paperless in international arbitration. Claudia, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Mariam. Hello, everyone. Actually, this is a very important and hot topic, as Bethany has explained, and it's very dramatic the way I see it. A lot of us would ask, why not go paperless? Why should we go paperless? Some of you, because they are used to paper, so we're in our comfort zone. Some others, because maybe they like the smell of paper. And other things, it's more secure because you have it physically there somewhere. So it's not like the technology where you might lose something or not be able to find it. Now, this is what we think. However, as it turned out after COVID, a lot of things have changed, and we were very easily able to adapt to everything that has changed overnight. I recall that the first court hearing we had here with the KFC courts was online with judges from all over the world, and it was electronically done. And this was like 3 weeks into the pandemic in April 2020. And we all had to adapt very fast, and it was a success and this was over the period of 2 days. Now, why go paperless? If I could ask you, please, Marwa, to put up the picture on the screen. I'm showing you here, this is the corridor in our office. This is one set of documents for one party in an arbitration. You can multiply this by 5, and this is one submission. So what do we see in the picture? Just to understand, it's not only boxes and papers. This is basically paper, ink, box files that could have plastic in them, the courier, any express courier, which also uses additional papers to do this, to send the papers abroad, in addition to a whole set of papers involved in this kind of work. And these sets of papers would eventually be multiplied by maybe 10 times and be thrown away within 1 month after the end of the arbitration. This is just to give a visual of what we're talking about. Marwa, you can take down the picture, please. Thank you. So why do we have to go paperless? First of all, it is life-changing. Although the first step would put us out of the comfort zone that we're used to, but it is life-changing. It gives you the freedom of not being tied down to where the papers are. So basically, you have everything on your laptop or your iPad. So wherever you are, you can be on a vacation in an island, and you just have everything on this small piece of technology. It definitely is a better organization for yourself, as well as to the team you're working with, the counterparties and the arbitrators. We now have platforms that can be used by all. There are platforms that can be used by certain teams, and it could be with the client. So you have everything centralized in an electronic manner. You also have peace of mind, because the reminders are there. You can set the reminders, and you don't need to go and check where are your notes to remember what's happening. And it also contributes to the collaboration, because all work can be done on the same document, electronic document, without using papers. It's centralized. You can see all the comments, you can see your sticky notes. Whatever you can do on paper can be done these days electronically, even the highlights, the color that you want. So whatever you like to do on paper, it is now available in a digital manner. And again, when you walk into a desk and you see how clean it is, instead of having the files piled up, lawyers where you can see their heads, drowned under a humongous number of files, and this, we don't see it anymore. The desks are cleaner, and again, everything is just on your computer. It also, this is based on experience, increases the efficiency of the team. Again, when collaborating, and if someone is not there, you don't have to go and look into their personal documents or personal paper on the desk. This helps a lot, especially in big arbitration cases where you're talking thousands of documents and memos and submissions. We go to, of course, a reduction of costs. Sometimes we pay maybe 10, 15,000 US dollars just in terms of transporting the boxes from one country to another to different parties located around the world. So there's also, and this is very significant when it comes to costs. And there's an enhanced security because nothing is lost. So whatever is saved on the computer, in the cloud, you will find it. It gives easier access to all, and as Bethany has said, it is eco-friendly, and this is a very important topic. So my conclusion to this is that we should be now all moving from the era of the paper era to the digital era. Again, this is based on our personal experience in the office and probably the experience of all the participants and the attendees. When we saw how we moved from the, and this is, we're talking between 2019 to 2020, because of the COVID and because we had to do all our hearings virtually, and we had to share a lot of documents which couldn't be done at a certain point in time by shipping them. So everybody had to adapt to the digital era, and we did have very successful hearings, sometimes 9 days long hearings, where you can put up any document and it's easier to locate it. It's faster to locate it during the hearing itself. And everybody would be looking at the same document in front of them instead of going every time like we used to do, pick up the file, open the file, choose the document from it. So that would be my answer as to why we should go paperless.
Thank you, Claudia. As it is indeed a life-changing, it is life-changing, and as it is the case with anything new, comes fear and concerns. And here I'd like to ask you, Khushbu, how would you address as an arbitration practitioner the concerns of the impact of going paperless on due process, and whose responsibility is it to balance between environmental concerns and due process concerns?
Thank you, Miriam, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all our attendees. I thought I would start by maybe talking a little bit about why I'm even interested in greener arbitration to begin with. It's a topic that's super close to my heart, and it was triggered by one of my early construction arbitration cases. As some of you, all of you may know, construction arbitration is notorious for being paper heavy and just document heavy. So in one of these cases, we received 24 brown carton boxes just in the early stages of the pleadings. The boxes we received were actually double the amount that Claudia just showed us earlier in her presentation. We didn't even have enough space in our offices. And I know Claudia's nodding because she probably recognizes this case. Sadly, someone actually in my office even suggested that I should be the one sitting with these boxes because we didn't have enough space in our office. And that was one of my matters. So I'm grateful that someone actually vetoed this decision. I didn't have to sit with these boxes. It would have been very depressing if these boxes were my roommate for 3 years. And honestly, I didn't even open these boxes apart from maybe twice. So really no one was touching these boxes. It was just taking up so much space, and eventually we shipped them to a warehouse on costs that we had to bear. We even tried to ask the client to take these boxes, but they said no. So this is why my interest in greener arbitration. This is how it started, and this is why I'm so interested in this topic. In light of the scientific data Bethany just told us, I think I'll probably struggle to sleep tonight thinking about how much paper we wasted in those years. But what's more important is moving on and convincing the 10% of you that why we should actually go paperless. You know, I'm a firm believer, like Claudia, that it's actually easier to collaborate when you're going paperless. You put these sticky notes on a PDF, you send it through a shared link. It's easier to see comments, notes. It's just so much easier to work with. And I love the fact that we can highlight in so many different colors on a PDF document. So you can use each color for a witness or an expert. You can't actually do this in real physical bundles. So I love working electronically. The silver lining of COVID is that it has accelerated the propensity of us lawyers to work electronically. But now with an increasing number of us coming back to the office in a hybrid work model, it's important that this trend remains, and printing really should remain the exception rather than the norm. So with that in mind, I'll go on to answer Miriam's question that she posed to me about balancing due process with environmental concerns. And to me, essentially, the answer is it's a balance, right? The balance needs to be done at whether going green in arbitration preserves the party's right to be heard and to what extent. Avoidance is obviously the primary rule. I don't think anyone's going to dispute that. It's the primary and basic rule. We avoid printing, we avoid traveling, avoid physical hearings. We use the same analogies for paper cups, for paper plastic bottles, sorry. So we use the same analogy. The primary rule is we avoid, obviously. But this does go hand in hand with investing in good technological gadgets and softwares that some of our colleagues here will speak to you about in our later panel session. When it comes to virtual hearing, it is a little different because it's never going to be the same as in-person hearings. It's physical human interaction. And there's also the possibility of technical glitches that may compromise the quality of those hearings that have to be accounted for. But again, these considerations need to be balanced. What's the dispute value, what's the dispute amount, the importance of the case, stakeholders, and all of these factors need to be balanced to assess whether physical hearings are actually required. The balancing exercise when it comes to going paperless, I think is a bit easier. And I think all of us would probably agree that we can slant more towards going paperless and going electronic without documentation. The second question that Miriam did ask was, whose responsibility is it to ensure that due process is sufficiently safeguarded and balanced against environmental concerns? And to me, this is a really easy answer. To me, it's all the stakeholders in an arbitration that need to really step up and take responsibility. And these include firms, whether they are large firms, mid-sized, small firms, arbitral institutions, and private practitioners themselves in a personal capacity, whenever they act as counsel and when they act as arbitrators. All of us have this role to make sure that we are convincing our clients, we are convincing everyone we're working with that going paperless and going green is the way forward. I mentioned earlier, or alluded to the fact that there's definitely some cost element that's associated with going greener, the technology and softwares, and that's important. There's appropriate trainings need to be had. So there is obviously an initial investment that firms need to be invested in. Knowledge management team, for instance, they go a long way to ensuring sustainable arbitrations. The right messages needs to be passed to the underlying arbitration users, i.e. our clients. So I'm going to stop talking in a minute. I think my last point is really all of this is ultimately underscored by a mindset shift. We need to get used to and commit ourselves to working and living in a sustainable manner. This means as counsel, we adapt to relying on electronic documents. As arbitrators, physical bundles should be the norm rather than, it should be the exception rather than the norm. The same thing for in-house counsel. They should understand the cost associated with going paperless, undertake a cost-benefit analysis of paper bundles, which are in any way charged at paralegal times vis-a-vis electronic bundles. In one of our cases that we did, the opposing parties' in-house counsel actually compiled their own electronic bundles to save costs. And they did such a phenomenal job. That really impressed me. All the documents were precisely hyperlinked. So that's something for in-house counsels to actually bear in mind and consider, to train their disputes teams on things like electronic bundling and hyperlinking. And that might go a long way for them as well. That's it for me, Miriam. Back to you. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Kushbu, for your intervention. Now that we have actually, I'm convinced that we need to go paperless, but how can we start going paperless? And here's Claudia again, who can help us by giving us some tips on how we can start going paperless.
Yes, thank you, Miriam. Marwa, can you please put up the video? I'm going to show you a small video just to spice up this webinar. And by the time we have it up on the screen, I entirely share what Khushbu has said. At the end of the day, this is a mindset and a culture that needs to be created within any institution, not only law offices and not only in arbitration. We need to educate ourselves and we need to educate the people we work with in order to understand that it's not difficult, even if we are not IT specialists or we haven't had any training, because as you will see, we have now people who assist us in this. This is a video.
Emma. Huh? Emma. 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 Emma.
Thank you for that. As you see, the conclusion of the video is that paper has a future, but of course, the one who did this ad are the people who sell the paper toilets. We're not gonna talk paper toilets today. However, the Japanese have come to create paperless toilets. So as you can see, paper should not have a future anymore. In any case, this was just to show you that I am Emma's husband, basically, when it comes to my mindset. Again, switching to being paperless should not be intimidating to anybody. You don't have to implement the changes all at once. Even small reductions, one day at a time, can help. But again, there is a culture to be created and a mindset to have. Now, going back to arbitration, just to go through when you start with the arbitration, it starts with the first meeting where you give paper business cards between the clients and the lawyers. Today, you don't need any more paper business cards because you have QRs that you can share on your phone, and it gives you all the information that you want. It's from what you are, where's your office, the location, your LinkedIn page, your website, everything is on the QR. Then you go to step 2, which is signing the letter of engagement. This is again involves paper. If you can spare the paper, you can do it now electronically, online. You just send it by email, they confirm. There are a lot of applications that allow you to do this. Then starts the exchange of documents. Again, you can do it all electronically by creating a platform earlier on where everything is shared between the client and the lawyers instead of sending hard copy papers. There's also, again, since the pandemic, we've seen institutional rules, for instance, the ICC, where they give the option to the parties not to use paper. So basically all the notifications, if they accept, can be done electronically. You no longer need to send papers across. And this is where, again, we encourage everybody to choose this option, which is everything should be electronically, whether among the parties, with the secretariat, or with the arbitrators. This also can be addressed in the terms of reference that will be signed eventually, or the arbitration deed, where the parties and the arbitration tribunal choose the electronic option rather than receiving, as Khushbu has mentioned, thousands and thousands of documents that probably 95% will never be open. So instead of piling up all these quantities of papers. Another idea would be for the in-house counsels, when they instruct the law firms, is to go to the option, the electronic option, rather than using papers. And these instructions we can take to implement them in the terms of reference, where hopefully everybody would agree. Again, what we see a lot in the arbitration is printing the same documents for the first round, second round, the hearing bundle, closing submissions, again, the documents whenever we need them. So to avoid all this, Again, it can all be done electronically. It can be saved in one place. It can be accessed at any time. It just have one reference number. You just click the reference number and you're already connected to any, you have access to any document that you want. And to make it easier of people who are not very technologically up to date and up to speed, or who don't like technology, this is not something that we lawyers do. This is a platform that you pay. They provide you with all this technology. Sometimes there's a person who can assist you. You don't even have to do the job. And this is what we see during hearings. When it comes to the hearing bundles, it's very easy to access. And this is one person who's running the entire show on behalf of all parties. And what we have seen lately is that the courts now, I think the UAE and it's not I think, the UAE and Qatar have already implemented an online court system where you no longer attend a hearing with papers. So basically you have to upload everything, it's paperless. In addition to the fact that from a hygiene perspective, you no longer have to touch the same paper that has gone through so many hands before reaching you. So this is also another, if you want, incentive to go paperless. And as also Khushbu has mentioned, the hyperlinks now, when it comes to big complicated cases, or even the simplest one, makes it very easy when you access a document electronically, and it directly takes you to the reference you're making within the same document. And again, because desperate times have called for desperate measures, we do have to thank COVID-19 in a certain manner, because it has, pushed us to go for the paperless options, which turned out again to be very successful. Again, in my experience, we've done over 6 arbitration hearings in 2020 that we never had an issue. It was very successful, maybe a delay of a few seconds or minutes, but it doesn't count. Even when you had witnesses joining, or a tribunal which was across the world, Hong Kong, UK, Australia, it went very smoothly, and we didn't have any problem. I do realize that there are some people who still prefer to have their own set of papers to do their own notes. But again, without repeating myself, at the end of the day, it's a mindset. If you put yourself to it the first time, the second time is much easier. The third time, you're on board fully. And the 10% who have chosen the paper option would definitely change their minds to a paperless world in arbitration, or in anything else, in any other industry. So that was my input. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Claudia. It was indeed helpful to have some tips from experience, from personal experience on how to reduce the use of paper. And turning to you, Khushbu, I also want to ask, does the protocols, the green arbitration protocols, help practitioners becoming more environment friendly, and are they actually used in practice?
Thanks, Miriam. So there are 6 different kinds of greener protocols depending on the ultimate user. So there's one for counsel, one for arbitrator, one for arbitral institution, and one for arbitration conference venue providers, and there are a couple more. The general framework in all of these protocols are actually the same, and they can be used as a guide. For those of you who haven't taken a look, I would strongly encourage all of you. It's on the website. It's very user-friendly, and it's comprehensive. But the ethos behind it is to avoid physical paper, to avoid traveling as much as you can as a basic principle, and where we cannot avoid, to use sustainable alternatives. So it's pretty comprehensive, all of these protocols, and there are some key principles. I would say that some of these principles go beyond what we can directly control sometimes. For instance, using clean or renewable energy or natural light sources where possible. we can't avoid, or well, sometimes we can't control these things. Depends on the institution or the companies you work in, or it depends on what time of that we are working. If you're working in the evening, for instance, we do have to turn on lights, obviously, or if we don't have windows in our rooms. Other principles is that they encourage to use the double screen monitors. Again, this is not entirely up to us. It also depends on the companies we work in. But making reference to these principles in these protocols, I think it's good in the sense that because we're attuning our minds, or everyone's minds in an arbitration, to these principles. So the arbitrators, the counsels, the clients, experts, witnesses, all of them are thinking about these principles. And that's, to me, that's really important, because we're making them aware that these principles exist, because this is such an important area that cannot be ignored. And that's important, that's fundamental to me. Again, it's about taking baby steps. I'm not saying that all of us should overnight just turn into, one of those green fanatics that go around cursing everyone else who prints paper. But to me, the right analogy is as a crash diet. A crash diet never works because it's just not sustainable. But what we have to do is take small baby steps and incorporate these habits in our daily life, slowly but steadily. And I think that's the way we're going to make a change in the arbitration community. Thanks, Miriam.
Thanks a lot, Khushbu. Thank you. And for our last question, there was a need to address, and we'll do that with better, some voices that claim that there are some setbacks on going fully environmental and replacing paper by by technology and e-means. How true is that? Can you please shed some light on this specific concern? Thank you.
Absolutely. So there's obviously a trade-off. Everything's a balance. There's no perfect solution to anything in life. So there are some things we need to consider. So if we are going to go paperless, we're going to be using tablets, laptops, screens. So those don't magically appear completely sustainably. They come from somewhere. They're made from materials. And these materials, there's going to be plastics in there. There's often also rare earth metals to make technology. And these are often found in countries that come and they're mined from countries that don't necessarily have very strict laws on mining practices. There can be issues. So lots of batteries come from materials that are mined in the Congo, and there's huge issues with child mining rights and security and health for the people that do that work. So there really needs to be some consideration of the supply chain. Where are you getting your materials from? Another thing is we've all got smartphones now. That's the way the world works. Most people want the new latest phone that does latest things. So how many people on this call have had a new phone in the last 3-4 years? What did you do with your old one? Did you put it in the bin? Did you give it to somebody else? Did you recycle it? Where does it go? Every piece of plastic that has ever been made, unless it's been burnt, still exists. So something else to think about. So the things that we're using have a life cycle, but just because they're not, when I finish with my phone and I want a new one, where does it go? Is it going somewhere else? Who's going to deal with that? Often we export our waste, especially our e-waste, from developed countries to developing countries. Now, there's only a finite amount, a limited amount ever of these rare earth materials because they're rare. So we have to go and retrieve them. And often these are done in places with labour concerns and rights of people that go through the waste. They're not often done very securely or safely. So this can be a huge problem. So we need to think about the life cycle. So if you have your tablet for several years, great, but we also think about where it's come from and where it's going. It's the whole cradle to grave. It's not just while you're using it. Also, we need to think about the energy use. So we're on a virtual call here. This is great. We've not flown all over the world to be together, though it'd be lovely to be chatting to all in person. But what's the carbon emissions of this conversation, right? We're on a Zoom call here. Zoom has servers that are big rooms basically where they have to keep all the equipment cool so that we can use the software. When we talk about the papers and the information being on the cloud, that's not a magic kind of invisible thing. That's actually stored somewhere on a server, and we have to keep the server rooms cool. So we use the same things that are in your fridge. the coolants that keep the room cold. And these are often quite toxic chemicals if not disposed of properly. We also think about if we're emailing each other, there's carbon emissions in an email. So they think it's between 1 to 26 grams of carbon dioxide per email is emitted, which doesn't sound like a lot, but actually, believe it or not, there are 333 billion emails sent every day. So when you multiply that up, that's a lot. So there's a lot we need to think about here in terms of the life cycle and the picture. But like Kush was saying, we don't all have to be perfect. It's about baby steps and taking steps in the right direction. It's not about, and like Claudia, Kush, we both said, it's not about a magic solution. It's about taking reasonable steps. So that's not to say you never use a piece of paper ever again, but it's saying what can be more efficient or how can we be more sustainable. So if we can do things electronically, great. But how I also thought about where my material's going when I finished using it. Am I making choices? Kushbu was talking about things you can control, right? So you need a light on. I've got the light on here, otherwise you won't be able to see me. But is my light a halogen light bulb or an LED? LEDs use less power, they're more efficient. Are you on a fossil fuel emitting electricity source, or do you use renewable energies for your power? And if you yourself don't know, ask the questions. Use the power you have as an individual to start asking these questions and putting pressure on people that can make the decisions if you can't make those changes. It's not about the perfect transition, it's about little steps. If you go paperless, but you're still using plastic bottles in your offices and in your calls, and when you go meet people, that's also not great. We're dumping 1 truck of plastic into the ocean every minute. So in this call, there have been 53 trucks of plastic dumped in the ocean. So if you're going paperless but still using plastic cups, you've got a problem. We've also, I've noticed in the conversation, there's been talked about using recycled paper, and is that not just the solution? How many times have you bought recycled paper? Do you make that active choice as a consumer? Do you actively make sure that the paper you're buying is recycled? Does your office use recycled printer paper? So you can say, oh, well, we'll just recycle it, it's fine. But if the consumer and the companies aren't using this circular economy, this recycling, then you're actually not solving the problem, you're making it worse. So it's all about thinking about things. This is a call full of 75 people who are all very intelligent and very powerful in the positions they have. So you have the power and education to make changes. Unfortunately, we live in a world where education is a privilege. But we have that privilege to have this education and the knowledge at our fingertips. If you don't believe the information I've been saying about cow farts or emissions or email emissions, then don't just believe me, go and Google it and do your research yourself. Use the power you have to go and be informed. If you don't believe me, that's okay. If you're that one of those 10% don't believe we have to make a difference, do the research yourself to back up why you don't believe in it. The scientists have said that climate change is unequivocally responsible by human actions. Some people still don't believe in that, but go do the research to come and then argue why you don't believe in it, because I'm sure you'll find once you start digging, there's more to it than that. We live in this post-truth, post-world era where people just see something online and believe it, but go and do that research yourself and find out for yourself, because that's where we can make a real difference. We don't have to be perfect, but be informed and make decisions that are informed decisions that can all contribute to making a difference.
Thanks a lot, Bethany, for this intervention and for showing that no matter how big our concerns, they still can be remedied while going paperless or keeping the planet clean. Before we move, we take a break. There is, I think, one question from the audience. I'll just quickly read it. Ahead of the pandemic, by concerning virtual offices, the law will need to be updated rapidly with high security. What do you think still needs to be added to comply in line with the fast progress and technology? That's a question from Sarah Duran. I think that's a legal question. So, and it concerns security. Should there be a law or laws issued that would help going more paperless, especially on the security side? Take more things into consideration from a legal perspective. I don't know who would like to answer this. Maybe Claudia?
Yeah, actually, I wanted to follow up on Bethany. I think there's a distinction to be made. That is what we can do individually on personal basis, on law firm level and in-house counsel level. This is, again, to create a personal belief, a personal mindset, a culture within what is in our control. This is when it comes to individual people. There is the higher level, which Bethany has addressed, is what do you do with e-waste? And these are matters related to politics. So basically, if you have politicians who believe in the future of the earth and who are making an effort, this is when there should be legislations in order to avoid having more and more waste, whether it is the e-waste or otherwise. And there aren't many countries that deal with this, even the very developed ones. So again, we go back to what is within your personal control and what is not. Now, you have the pledge, you have treaties and all this, which would push politicians to take an action. We do see laws that have been updated gradually. Most of the times they are not up to speed with the technology because it's a much longer procedure when it comes to issuing laws than to issuing new applications or new programs or new platforms or whatever. This is happening on a weekly basis. The laws cannot keep up to that extent. So what is being done, for instance, I gave an example, in the arbitration institutions, they are updating their rules. But again, these cannot be updated on a weekly basis. So based on the previous experience, you have a new set of rules or update of rules just to, if you want to be up to speed with what's happening and with the events. But again, we should encourage people to be self-aware, to make their own researches, to understand what is happening in the world, from using a simple piece of paper to a phone, of how the frequency of changing the phones. Because, for instance, why should you have different chargers for different phones? Android, you can use the same charger for all the Androids, but you cannot choose it on an iPhone. Why wouldn't the politician just make, instead of choosing the commercial aspect of this, make everybody use the same charger instead of changing it with every phone? So these are small examples that are out of our control, but what is within our control, this is what we should be focusing on in order to make things happen.
Thank you, Claudia. Before we move to the break, I know we ran out of time, but do you have, Khushbu, any last word, any last comment?
Maybe just a couple of comments related to the secure data. And I think I agree. I think that's what everyone is trying to say. Now that we're relying more on electronic ways of sending documents, there's a tendency for data to be compromised. And that's something we need to be careful of. I think all companies have to invest in better security systems. IT systems need to be more sophisticated to deal with protecting our data. To me, that's key. It does go hand in hand, as Claudia said, with government initiatives, which might be slower, but as private companies, we can do a little bit more to keep up with these technological advancements and to make sure that we are protecting our data. There's no one-way solution to all of these. It's just a matter of investing in really good technology and security softwares. And that's something just to bear in mind.
Okay, thanks a lot, Khushbu. But any last 10-second words?
Yeah, try to keep concise. Yeah, just to kind of re-emphasize that, yeah, this is the decade of action. If we don't make a change now, the consequences are irreversible. And while change may be scary, like we talked about, using new software, new ideas, what's scarier is the consequences of climate change, when we have food shortages, when we have no clean water supplies, when we're coping in extreme weather conditions. That's scarier than trying some new software, right? And it's also taking the power back. So taking our own decisions, educating ourselves, using the information that's available to us, but also then making our changes that we can make, then also pushing people to make the changes that are out of your control. So ask the questions to your companies, to your politicians, to your communities about what everyone is doing, so we can make a collective change and taking back that kind of power and ownership, because it's going to take the whole world working together to push on climate change. So it's really about collaboration, knowledge, and kind of coming together.
Thanks a lot, Bethany. Thanks a lot, Khushbu. Thanks a lot, Claudia, for your very valuable interventions. We will have now a 5-minute paperless break, just 5 minutes, and we'll be back. But in the meantime, do not disconnect, stay connected. Reconvene in 5 minutes, 5:05. we'll reconvene and start the second session. Thank you for attending.
Thank you very much, and speak in a few minutes. All right, I think we are 5 minutes in, so I hope everyone had a chance to take a quick break. I realize how tiring long Zoom meetings are. But this was, I thought, excellent. And thank you so much for all the questions that also came through the question box and on the chat. Please do keep them coming. It's very important to have this discussion because not, while most people, 90% of us, I guess, understand that it is important to go paperless, there's still a lot of sub issues that need to be discussed, and where I think we can help each other to try and improve in our various practices. And yes, small steps is definitely the way forward, with the eventual aim of going paperless. So thank you very much for I think Khushbu who made that comment. So with that, we'll move into the second panel, which I think is particularly exciting because that's the panel that will hopefully give you new tricks and tips about how you can make your everyday life more efficient. I think this is really the most important part of this topic because, yes, the environmental aspects are extremely important, and that's why we're doing it. But it really does make your everyday working life more convenient and better, as Khushbu has talked about a few minutes ago, when you use these various technological tools. And there's so many tools that most of us have never even come across. So I hope everyone takes at least one thing away from this session. So with that, let me introduce Justin, who is our moderator for the second panel. And thanks, Justin, for putting up this slideshow. So Justin is a steering committee member as well of the MENA campaign for greener arbitrations. He's also a senior associate at Al-Tamimi & Company in the arbitration department. He advises on cross-border disputes concerning various industries, including construction, real estate, M&A, and hotel management. He has a very significant experience in over 2 dozens of arbitrations administered by various arbitration centers in the region, as well as ad hoc proceedings. He actually began his career in Milan and has moved to Dubai in 2020. He is admitted in the US, in England and Wales, and Italy. And similarly to Khushbu, he also contributes frequently to online legal publications and delivers trainings in international arbitration, construction disputes, and so on. So we are very, very happy to have Justin. Justin is by chance our only male speaker, so that was not intended, but particularly happy that we do at least have Justin on board. So with that, thank you, and looking forward to this panel.
And thank you, Antonia, for that kind of introduction. So I want to just first off welcome everyone to today's the second session of today's panel. The focus of which really is to be and to explore some of the software that we can use during the course of an arbitration and to reduce paper usage. So obviously most of us are familiar with e-bundling services, virtual hearing providers, especially since the outbreak of COVID-19. And I think we can all agree that arbitrations didn't stop because we couldn't physically meet in person for in-person hearings. But there are actually a number of other programs that we can all use to minimize paper usage throughout the course of the proceedings and even before an arbitration begins. And our 3 speakers today, who are all prominent practitioners in the field of arbitration operating in different sectors, will actually explore some of the different software that we can use to minimize paper usage. They will also discuss their experiences when it comes to minimizing paper usage from their respective fields, and they'll also talk about some of the trends that they've noticed over the last 5-10 years. So I'd like to begin by introducing our panelists today. First off, we have Hustina Alban. She's the Director, Technology Advisor at FTI Consulting here in Dubai. She's also the Chapter Director for Women in E-Discovery, which is a US association for which she launched the Dubai-based chapter last year. She's been in the country, in the UAE, for almost 8 years, having spent the last 7 in the legal technology industry, advising and supporting clients in adopting technology to minimize paper usage in both contentious and non-contentious matters. She's very passionate about technology and sustainability and how technology can be used to minimize our carbon footprint. Our second speaker today will be Christine Falcicchio. She's the Vice President of the Steering Committee for Committee of the Campaign for Green Arbitrations. She's the founder of Sopra Legal, which is a company that specializes in the creation of hyperlink submissions. She works with law firms and clients to transform paper submissions into interactive digital presentations and e-bundles. She's also a strong proponent of e-filings and has written numerous articles about this topic. She consults with US courts and other organizations to promote best practices. And she's also an active member of a number of other organizations, including Arbitral Women, the International Law Section for the Florida Bar, and the Seton Hall Law School's Women Leadership Advisory Committee. And last but not least, we have Joanna Nerona. She's the lead legal project manager at Freshfields here in Dubai. She has over 15 years of experience in the field, assisting in complex arbitral proceedings, including case administration, document review, hearing management, and all other facets of arbitration. Finally, she also coordinates and provides training to teams in different countries, as well as developing ways to promote efficiency in arbitration. So I'd like to begin by thanking all our panelists for joining us today. And just before we begin with the presentations on the different type of software that we can use throughout the course of an arbitration, we just want to launch a poll to get a sense of the audience's preference when it comes to virtual versus in-person hearings. So as you can see here, the question is, now that travel and social distancing restrictions have been relaxed in most countries, whether you prefer virtual or in-person hearings. So we can see in the results that 23% say all hearings should be virtual, 7% say hearings should all take place in person, and then the majority of 70% say the procedural hearings should be made virtual, whereas merit hearings should take place in person. Now, I'm personally not surprised by that. Talking to a lot of practitioners over the last 18 months, this seems to be the preference. But interestingly, talking to a few barristers this week, there's some who have actually said that there are benefits to virtual hearings even during the merit stage, because you can zoom in on the witnesses and on the experts to see their facial expressions, and that might actually be a benefit when it comes to virtual hearings over in-person hearings in the merits phase. So that being said, before we actually go into today's presentations, I want to ask our speakers a question, namely that whether they've noticed differences in the types of software that have become available to practitioners over the last 5 years. And I think I'd like to ask this question first to Hustina to see what she has to say about this.
Hi, everyone. Yes, I wanted to also say thank you for the opportunity to speak, and everyone that tuned in now. It's very much appreciated your time. In respect to the question, absolutely, I would say yes. I mean, I have spent 7 years in this industry in the UAE. And I would argue that the last 2 years with the pandemic, we have seen an accelerated adoption of technology, without a doubt. And I wanted to use some numbers as well. Microsoft Office 365, which I think has been increased in usage, has launched over 923 features, and it's up to launch another 600. So I think it's really quite safe to say that there is a fast adoption of technology, and there's different reasons for that, but yes. You're on mute, Justin.
Thank you. Christine, what about you? Have you noticed any trends in the last 5-10 years when it comes to the use of technology in arbitration?
Sure, I would echo what Justina just said. As far as since the pandemic, there's definitely been an uptick in the various offerings that are available. I think what I've seen from providers as well is that we are all really trying to partner with practitioners to offer really bespoke solutions tailored to the specific needs of a matter. So it's certainly not a one-size-fits-all approach, and I would definitely encourage the practitioners joining us today to really consult with others about what the options are and the availability of different technology options.
All right, thanks, Christine. Joanna, anything to add to that?
Yes, I think pre-pandemic, most of the tech offerings were focused on automating processes such as indexing, coding, renaming, bundling, hyperlinking. But then after the pandemic, there is obviously a need for more virtual, seamless collaboration. So as Justina and Christine have said, you can see an uptick in more digital platforms, new features to rise up to the occasion. So I think the market is responding well to that need.
Thanks, Joanna, I appreciate that. So I think we can begin with our first presentation from Hustana, who will give an overview of the type of software we can use to minimize paper usage during the pre-arbitration phase.
Amazing. Yes, Justin, if you could go through the slides to the first slide, and then we can talk that through. I think in terms of going straight into the conversation and the why, first of all, I would like to highlight that every arbitration is different, but in this instance, we tried to focus on all the stages of an arbitration and the technologies available for that. Also to say that what we're presenting is by no means exclusive of what it is out there, and we're all just presenting what we're very familiar with. In terms of the why, I think considering the previous presentation, it's very clear why we need to do this, and it is actually down to the individuals to make mindful choices to create a better future, to create a better environment, and just to minimize really your impact on the environment. But I also want to say that this creates opportunities. There's opportunities to increase efficiencies and cost savings. So it's not all doom and gloom. There's a lot of opportunity there. The next slide, please. This is really, I think, articulating very well what Bethany and Claudia were outlining in the previous presentation. But I know it's overwhelming. When I got onto the sustainability path, I come from a village. I am in the village now, and I live in Dubai. And I grew up being, sustainable, and it was a way of living. And the world has evolved. And when you talk to people about sustainability, it can be very overwhelming. And I really wanted to bring this here before we go into the tech to say that it doesn't have to be scary, and it doesn't have to involve major changes in your life. It's all about micro changes and making these mindful decisions along the way. So, in the context of an arbitration, just think about it. Do you really have to be there in person? Do you have to travel there? Do you have to fly there? Do you have to print it? Or also, do you have to get that takeaway cup of coffee, or can you drink a coffee at home? Or can you make a phone call instead of traveling there by car, etc. So it's really coming down to changes that you do as an individual, and always questioning your actions. Is it really going to leave a footprint to the environment in a negative way? And so going into the technology, next slide, Justin. We had a scientist on the other panel, so I also come with some data to support what we want to say and argue over here. So there's been some data collection and analysis between in-person and virtual hearings done for medium-sized London-seated arbitrations. And I think it's quite obvious that the major impact was from flights for the in-person ones, while for the virtual ones, it's really on the preparation for the hearings. And I think for my section that's the one that I will be focusing a lot more on. What is it that you can do, whether you're going to have the hearing in person or not? What are the stages? What are the technologies available? What can you do to minimize your footprint up until the hearing and the technologies available to that? And there's ways in which you can optimize it, and 12 minutes are not sufficient to talk about all the technologies available, as I said earlier, but we're really trying to show why you have to do it, and then how can you do it to minimize the negative impact. So next slide. If we can go to this is touching into the e-discovery. And what really does that mean is that the boxes, the picture with the boxes was powerful, because that used to be a world where everything was printed, but the world is changing, and we're changing the way we communicate, the way we share data, and we have a wide universe of data. And so from the start of a case, it's really important, even at the early stages of like determining a claim's merit, to introduce a document management system. Even if you have to do that to even minimize the email correspondence, you could create a platform where you could put relevant documents in. So that's a very selective way in picking the documents initially relevant and determining the claim. And I know that that can be, you know, it could be in some instances scary from a price perspective. It's very price driven. And outside the hearing cost, the disclosure phases tend to be the most expensive ones. And I know that when it's client driven, when it's, you know, in-house counsel driven, they would argue that that could be a costly exercise. I'm here to argue that it would actually have long-term saving benefits in the full cycle of an arbitration. So start really early. Find a partner that can assist you with setting up a document management system. And these can be wide. Choose just the data that is relevant to you. And then even at the end of the day, argue that with the ESG agendas that firms, providers, and in-house counsels have, this is really the right way to go about. And so on the next slide, I chose to rely on some visuals to really outline 3 key points that would benefit and help you win the case, because at the end of the day, that's the goal for everybody. So it's really understanding the data that you have, the universe of data that you have, the claims merit. And so leveraging the tools that you have, so the document management tool, in my instance and at FTI, we use Relativity as the most common platform for document review, but that comes with all bells and whistles, and you can really accelerate your case strategy. The next thing that it really does is it's reducing your data by leveraging different analytics. You can reduce your data by cooling, email threading. There's several methodologies you can apply for doing that. And ultimately, it could also, by applying technology-assisted review, because obviously there's, you know, the technology is evolving, fast evolving, and you have technology to support you in your review, and, you know, you will reduce your time, you will reduce your cost. And I think ultimately what I want to say is that when you leverage all these technologies, and I'm going to use an example, and it's not boxes, but I hope you can visualize it. By using technology, there was a case that we worked on that had 17 million documents. And so if you are to think about using humans to review all that data, even if they do that remotely, they will still have to log in on their devices and manually review that. So technology was really used to reduce that volume of data and bring it down to 1.5 million. And I think that's where you could argue the power of technology in minimizing your impact, negative impact on the environment. You know, all of this can be done remotely. And I think Claudia said that you actually, you know, as practitioners, as lawyers, you don't have to do all of this yourself. And I know it's scary, and I speak with lawyers all the time, it can be overwhelming, but you will always have someone there, an expert in this tech, to assist you on the best ways to leverage this technology. On the next slide, I wanted to bring a different angle to the paper story. And I know we're arguing to go paperless, that is really the great story, but the reality is also that the universe of data has changed. And as lawyers, you have to leave no stone unturned. And one of my solicitor friends gave me a story about how a case was broken by some paper documents that were at someone's home that were never really brought into the case that later on were discovered. And I think what I'm trying to say is that with the changing data, and particularly in the last 2 years with the pandemic, there's been an increase of use in messaging platforms. And that becomes perhaps the danger, where there's so much data that is flying about that you're at risk of not looking over it. So there is now technology available for you to review these messaging messages into one universal platform. And I have seen in the past, you know, screenshots printed to be used in court. So long gone are those days. There is technology available to put that all into just one universal messaging platform. I think what I'm trying to say is that it can be overwhelming. You could find yourself almost in a room full of boxes. You can find yourself in a room full of all these messages flying about, but there's a simplicity behind it if you use the right tools and, you know, time efficiency. On the next slide, just one more click, because that's just to show how it would appear. And before the takeaways, I wanted to leave you with this image of, you know, starting really early from collecting the data that would be relevant for your case, and it could be from a multitude of sources, to really early on in the data analytics, number 2, applying machine learning and analytics, to then going down to filtering that data from the 17 million to the 1 million. And then further applying analytics and machine learning, and, you know, even human review. That all of this, all you can see on this slide, can actually be done remotely, and has been done successfully for the past 2 years. And I do believe it's going to continuously go that way. And I know that, you know, you could argue that the regulatory landscape is also changing. There's data privacy regulations in place, data transfers rules. All that is also evolving, and there is now more room to navigate this, not just from a cost perspective, but really considering the impact we have on the environment. On my last slide, what I really want to leave you with is the using of technology is really no longer optional. You know, outside the benefits that it's, you know, at your fingertips, we all carry it with us. You have to follow the path that we're all going towards. And the second one is collaborative technological tools. There is extremely powerful, there's a message I got from one of my friends that, you know, imagine you have to travel, imagine you're sick, you have to do a handover, having to do the boxes of papers to someone that then has to understand your way of thinking is not really efficient anymore. So collaborative technological tools are existing where people can work in a platform at the same time. And my last one is to really start with the end in mind. What is it that you want to leave behind as a legacy? Of course, you want a successful arbitration, but it can easily be a successful, sustainable arbitration. And I know this was a lot and very fast paced, but of course, for any questions or more practical tips, we're always here to answer questions. So that's all from me.
All right, thank you, Husna. It's interesting to see how we can really cut down paper usage during the pre-arbitration phase. So before we move on to our next speaker, I just want to ask you all whether you've noticed, for example, a generational gap when it comes to use of software in arbitration. And I think I'd like to hear from Christine first on this.
Sure. So this is an interesting question, because I think that initially there's probably a perception that it's solely the younger generation, younger associates and support staff who are more accepting of technology. And I think to an extent that is true, but what I found on many occasions is that it's usually the more senior arbitrators or practitioners who are really the ones that are leading the charge toward adopting that shift of using technology and embracing it. And this was even pre-pandemic. So what I would say with that is my advice is to never make any assumption based on an age group.
Okay, that's actually interesting. Joanna, have you had a similar experience?
I would say that it's true, Justin, the younger practitioners embrace technology much quicker, but I don't think seasoned practitioners are really far behind. Christine pointed out that they lead the charge, and that's probably because most of them are in leadership positions and are more discerning, probably, of choosing the right technology to adapt. But I think, again, it's about a matter of preference. So it's not generational, I think. I think it's a matter of personal preference.
Okay, thanks. Husna, anything to add before we move on?
I'm just going to echo what both Joanna and Christine said. I think in reality, from my experience, is less of an age, but more of a personal preference and background. Experience has played a key role. From when I speak to different people coming from different backgrounds or different, even countries that they practiced in before, you could see the nuances. So I wouldn't play the age card, no.
Okay, thanks. So I think at this stage we can move on to Christine's presentation, who's going to discuss how we can use software to go paperless during the memorial and pleading phase of an arbitration.
Sure, thank you, Justin. And again, thank you everyone who joining us now, and certainly to the MENA committee for gathering us today. So as you mentioned, I'll be getting into discussing the written submissions phase and touching on the why. I think that the first panel has done an excellent job of bringing us to this point. So we've pretty much covered the why it's important to aim to become greener in our practices and really to work on reducing the waste that we produce throughout the course of a proceeding. What I am covering today is one of those areas where I think it is quite possibly the most simple area to accomplish this shift. Kushbo mentioned in the mindset shift, and that really is where we are. I think that we need to make that personal commitment to try to shift out of the old ways of using paper. So I'll discuss with you now some of the areas that I think you should keep top of mind when preparing to submit your pleadings, as well as some of the approaches you should take. So if we can move on to the next slide. I've listed out here just some simple considerations to start you off. I think that one of the most important areas to tune into is knowing your audience. So we're having this conversation today, and you may have different comfort levels with using a software or technology, but it's ultimately going to be quite important to know what your tribunal is comfortable using, what their preferences are, and how they integrate technology. And I think that you can't necessarily sit back and wait for them to come to you with a solution, but really at the onset of a matter, when procedural order 1 is being prepared, there really should be a consideration as to the format in which you plan to present your written materials. And so where do you turn to figure this out if you don't already know of particular software or approach to use? I think your best place to begin is internally. Those of you who are at larger firms may have someone like Joe there who is an expert in leading these projects, and just discussing with your colleagues, getting any feedback you can on what their experience has been with maybe the arbitrators that are part of working on your matter, but also beyond that, looking outside of the firm to consult with external providers, such as myself at Sopra or Justina with her work as well. We can help to guide you and come up with some solutions that will help based on your particular matter. So we can move on to the next slide, please. Thank you. So again, I won't spend too much time on this because in panel 1, once again, I think Kushbo did a great job of introducing you to the green protocols, and hopefully those of you who are joining today or have at least some familiarity with them. As we've mentioned, this is an entire set of guidance that we have drafted at the committee to help you with not only in a proceeding, but in your day-to-day practices, how to work on reducing the waste that you produce and also to move through a proceeding in a more efficient manner. What I've included an excerpt of here is a part of the protocols that I'm particularly excited about. We have developed an entire model procedural order, and the goal was really to take the legwork out of putting this together for you. So you are welcome to adopt the procedural order in its entirety, or certainly to use components thereof if that's not possible. And as I'm showing on the excerpt here, we cover specifically your written submissions. Of course, with the campaign, we are advocating going completely electronic and using e-bundles or another online shared platform for your materials. But where it's not the case to go completely paperless, I think it's important to consider some of the options. And I know even in the chats during panel 1, there was some discussion of printing. When you do print, how you print is important. And that's certainly true. Again, in the protocols, we have some guidance on the recommended ways you print when it is necessary. But to that end, if there is perhaps one or more of the arbitrators on your tribunal, if there is a request from them to provide paper, perhaps you can have that communication about paring down the volume of what you're printing. So we all saw that powerful image from Claudia of those boxes and boxes. And an alternative would be, let's say for a particular submission, if it's accompanied by exhibits, perhaps you print in hard copy only that actual pleading, and then the accompanying exhibits can be submitted electronically. Likewise, if you encounter a few exhibits that are quite lengthy, then perhaps explore the option of only printing out an excerpt of those files and have the remainder and the entirety available electronically. So again, it's not that all or nothing approach, but it's taking into consideration how you can make some shifts to get to that point where hopefully eventually you'll be fully paperless. On to the next slide, please. So in a moment, I thought it would be helpful to show you a little bit of a demo of the work that we do at SOPRA. We put together hyperlinked submissions, and when we're just a quick focus on that, we work entirely in PDF form. So we'll start playing the video here. What you're getting is a series of PDF files. It's not a special software or any kind of learning curve for the tribunal, but you'll see it's just well-organized documents that are also accessible via the bookmarks and also in the folder structure. In international arbitration in particular, there are oftentimes documents that are available in multiple languages. And so it's important to make sure that that's all readily accessible for your tribunal. You can see as we're going through the links that you're flipping between the Spanish and the English versions of the procedural order. Next, just showing you a sample of the pleadings list. And here again, the entire documents are available for the tribunal to review, but they're also, the underlying documents themselves contain hyperlinks to all of the references within those files. So again, this is just a demo, and we've used some publicly available materials, which is why you see redactions, but you can see that you can click on a hyperlink and be directed right to the paragraph that's cited. And from there, you may resume your reading and go back to the brief itself and read on to the next paragraph. This next link is showing you how you also have that ability to go in and add highlighting when there's perhaps a very crucial segment of a document that you want to make sure the tribunal focuses on. You can add highlighting to that. And again, it's all intended to be very user-friendly and easy to navigate, even for those who are maybe somewhat hesitant to adopt technology. It's similar to being on the internet and scrolling around there. So we can move on to the next slide, please. Okay, so what I really hope that you take away from the discussion here on your written submissions are the considerations that you should have as you're moving toward this phase of the matter. The first off, as I've mentioned, is to be a bit more proactive in raising some suggestions to your tribunal. Those who are on the call that are arbitrators, hopefully you have done some research and become aware of some of the available options, but that's not always the case. So it sometimes involves having a conversation with your arbitrators. I've actually worked on several matters where the PO1 called only for hyperlinked indices to be submitted throughout the proceeding, but not for the actual pleadings themselves to contain hyperlinks. But once parties realized the volume of materials at issue and just how dense it would be to review, they went back and requested to see if the tribunal was interested in receiving complete hyperlinked versions. And in all cases that obviously that we've worked on, they were. There's a point that I touched on, I guess, indirectly, but I think it's important to bring up, and it's been mentioned previously by some of our other speakers today, but it's not only obviously the environmental benefits of paring down on paper, but you will most certainly save on the time that it takes to review. So you're really helping to reduce the costs that are expended on, as we saw, preparing and shipping boxes of materials all over, but also you're paring down on the time that your tribunal will take to review the materials. And also internally, as you move through a matter, I have, again, several firms that I partner with where they'll ask us to hyperlink the opposing counsel's pleadings before they submit their reply briefs. And this just helps them to navigate through those materials more efficiently. And then finally, again, where do you turn for help with this? I would recommend that you liaise both internally and then explore externally what the options are. Justin, if we could just move ahead one slide. On a similar note with this wrap up here, I'm reminded of a conversation that was quite memorable that I had with a more seasoned arbitrator who first of all was talking to me about how he often had to convince his perhaps younger co-arbitrators to shift from using paper bundles, but also his affinity for using the electronic filings and to use hyperlinking was this quote that you see here, where he's saying, the more you help people to see what you want them to see, the more likely they are to do what you want them to do. And isn't that ultimately your goal when you are working on a proceeding? It's to really help the tribunal to guide them towards seeing the merits of your argument. And I think that if you use these electronic formats effectively, you can really have a better hand at doing so. So with that, I will pause here so that we can focus on other phases of the proceedings.
Yeah, thanks, Christine. It was very interesting to see how we can really minimize paper usage during, let's say, probably the most paper-heavy phase of the arbitration. Now, I just wanted to pick up on something and I want to ask you, now you've worked with many different law firms around the world. So I want to see, have you noticed any trends when it comes to paper usage versus the use of electronic software based either on geography or the size of the law firm?
Sure. So I do think, as you mentioned, we're based in the US, but we do work with firms globally. What's interesting is the pandemic has certainly propelled firms of all sizes to really rely on technology, perhaps more so than they did before. It was certainly a necessity. Since then, I have to say, and I know we're not fully out of this, but now that some of the many restrictions are being lifted, I've noticed that a handful of firms have maybe reverted back to some of their sort of pre-pandemic practices and moving back to the paper. But for the most part, that is not the case. I think that people are continuing on and really embracing the shift to rely more on technology, especially because of the convenience that it offers. As far as where we see more of this occurring, our most frequent clients tend to be in North America and the US, and then Europe, and then also Asia and the Middle East. So there is, I think, globally, again, I think the pandemic really helped to get us over the line there. And as far as firm size, it's really both the international firms, but also smaller firms too, I think are realizing that this is where we are heading, and there's certainly a lot of upside to embracing going digital.
Okay, thanks, Christine. Husna, I'd be interested in getting your views, given that you're based in the MENA region. Have you noticed something similar? What have you witnessed over the last few years?
Absolutely. I think it's a different kind of landscape over here. I would say, at least in the last 5 years, there's been an adoption of technology from smaller regional firms as well, in equally, at least in this part of the world, from more European, UK-based firms. Historically, the US firms have led the way in terms of the use of e-discovery tools. So that still remains because they no longer need that educational piece as to why you should use it. But one of the very interesting things I have noticed is now, you know, law firms are trying to remain competitive as well, and they're trying to solve client problems. So now they're more driven about that. How do they solve their clients' problems more efficiently, time-wise and cost-wise? But also the other thing I've noticed is even really small firms, when they do not have the staff, they see the benefits in using the technology, because the technology supplements the lack of like human resources. So you could see both, like the really big ones using technology and the really small ones, boutique firms, to really be able to compete with larger firms with bigger resources.
Okay, thanks, Husna. It's good to see that both large and small law firms are moving in the paperless direction. So I just want to move on to our final presentation by Joanna, who will discuss how we can go paperless during the pre-hearing and hearing phase of an arbitration.
Thank you, Justin. Please move on to the next slide. And thank you again for this chance to show up for the environment. I am Jo, and I'm truly passionate about reimagining processes to help legal teams. So I am a project manager by profession, so therefore I will try to keep to time, but it is such an honor to contribute to this cause. Again, I will reiterate that I will be drawing from my practical experience as a support professional in a law firm. I will share some new tricks, but it is actually my hope that I can help you look closer to home and check the tech solutions that you already have in your toolkit. For my share of the spotlight, I will briefly take you back to pre-COVID hearings and profile elements that can help hearings go paperless, share activities that I undertake to prepare for hearings, the traditional options to undertake or execute tasks, and some green options to do them, identify basic tech needs and propose products to address them, and impart a very short, some wise words about how I think we can set us up for success. And if Justin could please take me to the next slide. So there you can see a picture. It's very typical. I've organized so many of these hearings, and it's just embedded in my head pre-pandemic. And I can tell you with confidence, and can support everyone's statement during this webinar, that maybe only 30 to 40% of the files in that room were used. And the rest would just be unread, untouched volumes produced to perfection with so much anxiety. And so hopefully for paralegals, legal project managers all around, and PAs, I hope that paperless will also decrease the stress. You know, COVID or no COVID, the price to pay for the right to be heard just seems very high. And that will take me to the next slide, wherein I will once again reiterate the qualities of what I think a paperless hearing should have. And you will see on top of the list, obviously, electronic bundles. If you adapt just electronic bundles, I think you can already make a lot of difference. If the parties agree to exchange only electronic copies by way of standard procedure, then more gains will be, there will be more gains. Another element is a shared virtual space onto which parties can upload material. And again, as mentioned during this discussion, most arbitral institutions already have that space. Another element is video conferencing. So because you need to be in conference, you require exhibit display, and therefore that also leads to reduction of hard copy demonstrative handouts. Other tools that you can think about are DocuSign for e-signatures, the Microsoft Teams channel for internal communication, and task tracking. And finally, a virtual case manager who will ensure that the proceeding can be seamless without the parties being in the same room. And if Justin could move me to the next 2 slides, I will briefly walk you through the tasks that I have to facilitate and arrange for our hearings. And you will see here, I have four 4 tasks in this slide. In the next one, I have 2. But in the interest of time, I will nitpick the less obvious solutions to share. Number 2, you have there for signing documents. You can now actually use a certified e-signature platform, one of which is called DocuSign. And you need to upload the document to the platform, and then it will ask you to mark the fields requiring completion. You will send it to the signatory, and then if you need it back or if you need an e-witness, you can just jump on a Teams call, record him or her signing the document, and send it back to you. So that already saves you a lot of time printing, scanning, and going through the motions and querying originals. So that's, I think, a really game-changing tool, especially for signing large amounts of documents. Moving on, as for internal bundles, you already know that. You have, I think almost everyone would know how to use electronic bundles, but I think the key thing there is just to ensure that all PDFs are searchable and that you have all of your standard naming procedures for PDFs are actually in one place. So you have to make sure that everything is organized. Moving on to the next slide, you will notice I will mention another bundle. That's because that's, I think, the crux of the problem, just too much paper. The traditional option is you would just print volumes and volumes of them, but obviously now you can have searchable, hyperlinked electronic bundles in collaborative workspaces, such as HiQ, or they used to call it SitePoint, SharePoint, OneDrive, Box, or other software offered by third-party providers such as Opus and Caselines. And you can also, for your internal purposes, generate automatic indexes using those platforms. So if you already have them in-house and don't know about that, please go and check with your IT, because it really do exist. And then next you will see transferring and exchanging data. You can now, most law firms now have their own secure file transfer sites. So instead of sending hard copies by courier, you can actually just zip them, upload them, or send them to other parties. And so that's also one way to reduce paper consumption. And lastly, in the management of teams and processes, so one thing that I have heard less around here is the thing that glues everything together. And so you have your bundles, you have your processes, but you also need to make sure that everything is well organized. So before, you have to always be in meetings, always take a phone someone or send an email to be able to organize every aspect of your filing or hearing. But now with tools and apps in, for example, Microsoft Teams, you are able to use planners, the task list. You can create your own silo within Teams wherein you can exchange ideas, start conversations. So I think that's also game changing as well. If you could please move the slides to the next one, I will then walk you through what I think are the 5 basic tech needs. And I know it's really very easy and obvious to just agree to engage third-party providers offering one-stop solutions for your hearing needs. However, that is not always the case. Maybe it's budget, maybe it's preference, maybe you just couldn't agree. But in case you don't have that option, I have identified these 5 basic needs and the tools that you can use to fulfill them. So I will start with, I've listed display, annotate and highlight, search, organize, sharing, and collaboration. So if you are left to your own devices to display exhibits, the screen share function of most VC platforms is actually very suitable. However, if you want to go a step further, you can actually install Trial Director. It allows for calling out extracts, placing documents side by side, or highlighting points while you advocate. So it's possible you can train your staff, your PA, or your paralegal to do it for you if you don't have an external hearing provider. Also, in lieu of highlighting and annotating, so I've heard others speak about that today, you may use all PDF applications. So all of these functionalities are already available in Adobe, Colfax, or iAnnotate. So you can highlight on the go, upload, and have access to your electronic e-binders on your iPads, and then review your files on the plane or wherever. Although I'm not encouraging that should be done all the time. It seems very stressful, but in case you need to, that's already available. The third need that you need to fulfill is to have searchable documents. And so you probably think you need sophisticated technology for that. Well, honestly, like with Adobe Acrobat, you can OCR or make searchable batches and batches of files at the same time. If you need to search for terms in multiple PDFs and don't have the platform to upload all of them, but you have access to SharePoint, you can upload your PDFs to SharePoint and then type in the field. It will search through the documents. The only flaw that I have discovered in the last few years is that with SharePoint, the OCR function will only be usable up to 4 levels of folder structure. So like, just be careful if you have, as I do, like if you work on lots of construction matters with too many of these documents, up to sometimes 20 levels, then that will probably not work. But another option to do that is to combine all your PDFs into one temporary file and then start searching. That's a bit primitive, but if you're left to your own devices, again, you can also do that. The fourth need, which I think you should also think about when you're preparing for a hearing, is organizing and sharing your files. So again, there are platforms such as SharePoint, HiQ, and OneDrive, and most arbitral institutions already allow for you to do that. But preparation is not just going out. You also have to do a lot of the legwork in the background, and therefore, in order for your teams to support you internally, you should have a standard way of organizing your files and naming them, and a way of arranging your folders so that you can also feed into nurturing the habit of using technology. Sometimes our lawyers will just give up because we don't organize our files very well. And then if you want to exchange data, again, you can use the same platforms. On HiQ, I believe you can now you can not only give access to different types of files, you can also create a list that all parties can co-author and update in real time. So that's one thing that you can do as well on that platform. Lastly, about internal collaboration, I will again emphasize, I know Microsoft Teams, we probably have all of that, but there's lots of features there that you need to unlock and use. So for example, you can create a channel. So if you have 10 matters, you can have a channel for each of your matters, and then you can create your own case management environment within, wherein you can add tasks, add PDFs, create co-authoring files, and it just makes the conversation better, because all of the files and all the things you need, you don't need to send yourselves multiple emails anymore. You're just in this environment, like a Teams WhatsApp group where everything is already there. And that's only just a tool that is already available within Teams. So again, I guess the point of this slide and what I'm trying to say is, actually, if you are clear about what you need, there is a good chance that you will find the tool, that you already have the tool that you need to fulfill it. So please go in and check your toolkit and look at the functionality that you have not looked at before, and maybe it's just there right under your nose. Next slide, please. Right, and so you'll be happy to know that this is my last slide, and there's probably no need for me to reiterate the message, but I would like to say that technology is not going to necessarily liberate us from paper. It's our willingness to use it that will. And I believe that the first step is always, as Justina and Christine and the other panelists have emphasized all throughout, is to think long-term and start early. If you are in a senior leadership position, then maybe start promoting, enforcing the use of digital resources to force your teams to build a tech habit. What I've noticed is that if in my senior core members in the matter I'm working on are so, I have their buy-in, everyone just follows. It becomes a collective habit for everyone. And I think that's something that that we can consciously do in our teams. And again, something that was discussed as well, we should make printing the exception, not the rule. And that every little thing that we do towards the environment will go a long way. And while it is unrealistic to expect hearings and perhaps the entire arbitral process to be completely paperless, anything that we do now will really help. I hope that was very useful, and thank you again for your time.
Hey, thanks, Joe, for walking us through the ways we can go paperless throughout the pre-hearing and hearing stage, and showing us that there's more than one option for our needs. So I guess I want to close with just one poll for the audience. And the question really is this, to see, based on all the software and all the presentations you've seen today, how willing are you to consider using some of the software that we've explored? Okay, so the results are in. I'm happy to say that over 2/3 of the participants are very likely to use some of the software. So I'm glad to see that more and more people are moving towards a paperless way of doing things. Just to close, unfortunately, I don't think we have any more time for a Q&A. So I just want to pass the word back to Antonia for closing remarks.
Thank you so much. This really was fantastic, and I'm so glad to see this poll result. So very much hope that everyone will just take at least one thing away from this session. We talked a lot about software. I wanted to briefly also show there's hardware that is really useful. That's something that really revolutionized my life over the last 6 months, thanks to actually one of the attendees at this session who mentioned this about 6 months ago. And now, rather than carrying about 20 different notebooks, I take my notes with a pen on the iPad, and it really is just so much easier and better. So with that, thank you very much to the organizers, Miriam, Kushbo, Justin, the both firms that co-sponsored this event, and to all of the attendees and all the panelists, of course, for sharing really, really excellent tips. This has been really important and personally a very important topic to me. So I hope everyone enjoyed it. Any questions, please feel free to get in touch with us. As you saw, there are lots of experts on this panel that know various parts of our process in much more detail than most of the practitioners. So please do reach out if you have any other questions, and we hope to see you at future events. And of course, please check out the Greener campaign. If you haven't signed, please sign, have a look at the protocols, and yes, any questions, we'll be very happy to answer over email. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.